relationships, I would definitely say this is one of the pillars for success. Mastering the art of relationships, as you said, one of the main things you learned from your father. I did learn this from my father as well. My father is a master on relationships as well, was the key for his success, besides being a very good dentist. The other thing you mentioned was, finding great mentors. I think that's another pillar, a shortcut to success, finding great mentors, and lucky the students that have you as a mentor and can listen to you and have their light bulbs going on because they're interacting with you.
Christian, I would love for you to introduce our guest today.
And I would love to introduce him, but before, just hello to you, Kirk. Once again, here on our Tuesdays together, bringing our both communities together. I'm loving this. So it's great to have one more guest here. And I always say, and he always answers, no, that's not true. But I always emphasize that once again, he is one of my mentors, one of the guys that I most admire on the lecturing circuit. As I say, there are many great clinicians giving lectures, but there are very few real teachers giving lectures. That's why we love the real teachers, and I can name maybe 6, 7, 8, 10 names that I really admire, not only as a clinician, but I admire as a teacher. And Bill Robbins is among these few, as I call, thought organizers. And this can be confirmed by his amazing book with another guy that I admire so much, Jeff Rouse, Global Diagnosis, his book that I suggest in every single lecture I give as one of the best books to not only give you a recipe to treatment plan, but make you understand how to think, the thinking process. So for me, it's a great honor to have Bill here in our podcast, not talking about the regular topics. I interviewed Bill many times, you as well, Kirk, not talking about him giving a lecture about a clinical topic, but we understanding who is Bill as a person, Bill as a dentist, Bill as a teacher. So welcome, Bill. Please say hello to our community.
Oh, it's indeed a pleasure to be with both of you today. Two of my favorites on the earth. I get to see Kirk fairly often, and we get to talk, but I don't get to see you very often. And so it's just a pleasure to see your face and hear your voice. And thanks for the invitation today. And the other thing is, it's always interesting to me that in the hierarchy of things, we always consider the old guy to be the mentor and the younger person to be the mentee. I mean, that's just the way the world is kind of set up. And I'm a couple of decades older than you, and yet clearly I consider you to be an important mentor to me. And so it really transcends age for sure.
What an honor.
We may get into it or not. I don't know about how we met and so on, but certainly I consider you. It's interesting that you would say that you consider me to be a mentor, because I feel exactly the same way about you.
Yeah, but having you saying that shows why you are my mentor. Just this super genuine, humble approach to everything that comes to you, being so positive about things. You are one of the most positive persons I met, for sure. And I know life is not easy to anybody, and life is maybe we're not always easy to you, but you always had this very positive approach to things, always with a smile on your face. And that is one more reason why I love chatting with you and learning from you. Getting this opportunity, we always talk a lot about dentistry, but for me is also a unique opportunity to get to know you a little bit beyond that. My first question to you is, why dentistry?
Why dentistry is the easiest one to answer for me, because I never knew anything different. My grandfather was a dentist. My two uncles were dentists. My father was a dentist. And I know I don't approach your 8 or 9 generations of dentists, but I did have this background. And when I was growing up, my father's dental office was in our home. Back in many years ago, it was that way in the United States. You'd have home upstairs and dental office downstairs. And so I followed my dad around as a little kid in the dental office. And I loved my dad. He was a great man, and his patients loved him. He had a great personality. And I still remember sort of early in my time of following him around the office. Then later, when I was actually in dental school, and in the summer, I would hang out with him in the office some. And he would walk out of the office, and he treated blue collar patients pretty much. And so they would be mechanics and farmers, and they would say, "So son, I hear you're going to dental school." And I said, "Yes, sir, I'm in dental school." And they say, "If you're half the dentist your father is, you'll be a hell of a dentist." And so I grew up with a very positive attitude about the profession, and really never considered anything else. If you're a Robbins boy, you just become a dentist. That's just the way it was. And sort of the final chapter of that is my son Andrew just graduated from dental school 3 weeks ago. And so he's fourth generation. So we're trying to catch your eighth or ninth.
Ah, man, I better move.
And he literally is just starting his AGD residency program last Friday. So he's going to do another year now and try to grow up as a dentist. So it's an easy question to answer. That's all I ever knew was dentistry.
Fantastic. Now, since you had this amazing, because my father's also a dentist, but I was never a teenager or a young person that wanted to, go to my father's office. I was never there. And my father was very casual about it, never pushed us, never took us. It was a last minute decision, kind of the opposite of you. So you had this opportunity to really see dentistry done by your father many decades ago. What decade was that?
Oh, well, it was, this is my 50th year practicing dentistry. So, it was 70 years ago when I was in that process of making a decision about being a dentist.
And people say that dentistry is going through a disruption now. It would be cool to understand, how do you compare dentistry done at that time? What are the things that catches the most your attention about what you saw happening in a practice 60 years ago and what you see in the practice happening now?
Well, it's interesting because I think there's a dichotomy there. That which makes dentistry so fun, so enjoyable is the relationship part of it. And my father was not a great clinician. He was actually a farmer who loved to farm, and dentistry just supported his bad habit of farming. And so he didn't have the same passion for dentistry that I have. So it was the relationship part that I first learned about when I hung out with him, and how he related to his patients and how much they loved him. So what drew me into dentistry, I think, was the relationship, not the technical part. I mean, from the clinical part, obviously, dentistry is so much better in so many ways. Back in his day, what he would do, I would stand there and watch him, and he would extract 28 teeth on a patient and put in an immediate denture. I mean, that was a normal day for him. Well, that's not my normal day anymore. We don't do that anymore. But the relationship part of it that he taught me, I think, is what drew me into it. And I would say at this stage, it's what still is the most rewarding for me, because I'm still practicing, but I'm practicing part-time. I sold my practice to a young prosthodontist 3 years ago, and she's been a wonderful friend and boss now, actually. And what brings me to the office these days, what I continue to enjoy doing here, is primarily seeing my old patients. So I'm still doing dentistry, and I do some sophisticated dentistry. I don't work near as hard as I used to, but I see my old patients that are really her patients now, and I have time. I'm not rushed anymore. And so I have time to sit and talk with them. And so it's interesting. What brought me to dentistry was the relationship part of it. And what's going to usher me out at the end is the same. And then there was a lot of technical dentistry in between.
Many people listening may not know this, but Bill, you spent a considerable portion of your career in academics. You also then went into private practice, and that gives you a unique perspective. You had a lot of kids that you were mentoring through the dental school, and then you see a lot of practicing dentists out in the world speaking to all these study clubs. What would be your top 3 things that you noticed as, like, those are 3 things I love as I interact, that if, let's say I'm a 32-year-old dentist listening to this, what would be your 3 things that you noticed out of all the clinicians you've met for a successful career in dentistry?
Well, I think we all go through many different passages in our lives. And, you know, I went to the Pankey Institute many years ago, and I learned about the cross of life and, you know, the 4 arms of the cross and happiness in the center. And I've come to believe that it's a very difficult and perhaps even a false thing that we're trying to attain with this goal of living our life in balance. And I struggled with that concept, and maybe we'll talk about that a little more. So for a young dentist that's 32 years old, let's say she has a husband, she's got a couple of kids, she's got a full-time practice that she's actually bought into. So she's not doing this as a hobby. This is her career. The idea of living your life in balance is impossible. If you're building a practice, it's going to take more of your effort than the play side of your life. So I'm not demeaning play and family and worship. I think those things are incredibly important. But certainly there are times in your life passages when you're going to have to commit more to one of those 4 arms than the other. So I think, you know, the success of a young dentist is going to take a lot of work. And there's just no way around it. And I think the next part of it is you can't do it by yourself. Clearly, you have to have people taking this walk with you. I've had so many people along the way that have helped me from the business side, the professional side, and the emotional side, and the behavioral side. And dental school is literally just tipping your toe into the pool. And I see that with my son. And he's smart enough to realize it. I mean, he is a rank beginner and all of the things that we just talked about. And so he's going to have to enlist a lot of people along the line to help him in this journey. The other part is what I've loved in my career is watching the light bulb go on. And I know that Christian and you also have experienced that a lot. And that's when you're working with a younger dentist or a student or a resident, and all of a sudden they get it. There's some concept that they get. And that feeling, I think, transcends almost any for me as a teacher. When I see a light bulb go on the mind of a young dentist, and they get either a vision or at least they get an idea of what we were talking about, what the goal was for the discussion we were having. And so the thing I love is being around, I love young dentists. I love dental students and young dentists and residents because they make me feel young. They energize me. And when the light bulb goes on in one of their heads, and occasionally, less now in all honesty, but occasionally the light bulb goes on in my head also. So there's still clearly a give and take. And that would probably be a pretty good segue, I think, Christian, for you and me to talk about how in my late 60s, you captured my imagination.
So you mentioned relationships. I would definitely say this is one of the pillars for success. Mastering the art of relationships, as you said, one of the main things you learned from your father. I did learn this from my father as well. My father is a master on relationships as well, was the key for his success, besides being a very good dentist. The other thing you mentioned was, finding great mentors. I think that's another pillar, a shortcut to success, finding great mentors, and lucky the students that have you as a mentor and can listen to you and have their light bulbs going on because they're interacting with you. But going back to your career, you said that once in a while, light bulbs still come off, and that's amazing. That's, what we talk about, the beginner's mind. Even though you're a master, you are an extremely mature, successful professional, you still are open and you're still willing to learn. And once in a while, you still are excited about learning something. If you could look back into your career and explain the main landmarks, the main moments where you had these huge light bulb coming off, what were the key happenings or personalities or things that you went through that really bumped your career up?
So I'm gonna tell you about two. I'm gonna tell you about the beginning and the end, or closer to the end. So as I told you more about my father, and what a wonderful human being he was, but he wasn't passionate about dentistry, as I've already said. He worked half a day a week. I mean, half a day. He worked in the morning, and he'd go and take a nap, and in the afternoon he'd go to the farm. And so that's what he loved to do. He loved to farm. And when I was in my third year of dental school, I just assumed I was going to come back and work with my father. That's what you do. I went to school in Memphis, Tennessee. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's about a 2.5-hour drive. And I just assumed I would go back. He had room for me, and I'd go back to Little Rock and I'd go to work with him. That's what you did in those days. You worked with your father. And when I was in my third year of dental school, one day we were talking and he said, I've been hearing about a program called an internship for young dentists that just graduate. And I think you ought to consider doing that. And I said, I haven't heard about that. What is it? And he said, well, it's a year that you spend after you graduate from dental school, and you learn some more. And then after that, if you want to come back and work with me, that'd be great. And I said, well, how do you find out about that? And he said, go to the VA hospital in Memphis, and they have a program there, and go talk to them. I said, okay. So I went to the VA hospital. I found out about this dental internship. They didn't call them GPRs back then. They called them an internship. And I applied for it because my dad told me to. You do what your dad tells you. I got into the program, and I loved it. It was amazing. And I learned so much in that first year that my head was spinning. And so that was the first indication to me that there was more than what I'd learned in dental school. I had to pay a year back for the year that I did. That was the way it was back then. So during my second year in the VA, when I was paying back for my internship, I decided that I wanted to get more education. And when I'd done my internship, I was with 3 months with a periodontist and 3 months with an endodontist and so on through the program. And when I would finish the 3 months, I'd want to be a periodontist. And then I would go to oral surgery. And after the 3 months in oral surgery, I'd want to be an oral surgeon. And so at the end of this thing, I realized I really enjoyed the whole breadth of dentistry. And the VA had just started a 2-year general practice residency. And so during my second year, when I was paying it back, I applied for that. I got in, I went to San Diego, and I did a 2-year GPR. And it was at that point that I was hooked into the academic side of dentistry. I just loved it. And so they sent me back to San Antonio. That's how I got to San Antonio to pay back for my residency program. There was a residency at the VA. I became director of that program. I started teaching a little bit at the dental school. And at this point, I was hooked in academics. And I've always been so grateful to my father for many, many reasons. But one of the reasons is that he had a vision for me that I didn't have for myself. And he essentially gave me the freedom to go off and pursue this other career. And he would have loved to have practiced with me. We would have had fun together. It would have been a successful practice. But he knew the type of dentistry he was practicing wasn't going to be rewarding to me. And he knew that I think he knew that there was more there for me than a career pulling teeth in Little Rock. And so he gave me the freedom and sort of pushed me out of the nest to do the academic thing first. And I never returned. And I never went back and practiced with my father, but I think he was very proud of the academic career that I had. And he never saw me in private practice because he died before I was in academics for 25 years, and he died before I went into private practice. So that was the front end, the freedom that my father gave me to sort of spread my wings. So let's go to the back end of the career. And it happened, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago it's probably 9 years ago when I first heard you speak. And, at this point in my career, we just written our textbook, Jeff, or we were conceiving the textbook. It was being written. And so I was fairly far down the road in my academic career. And I heard you speak. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. Now, back in those days, you had to do your own keynote presentation. I mean, you had to do your own smile design and all. And so I wasn't all that good at technology. And so the first time I heard you speak, I thought it was really cool. But I went home, that was in Chicago on a Saturday. I went home on Monday and did nothing about it. And one of my buddies, Brian Vincey, you know Brian,
Yeah, very well.
he had already started doing digital smile design with you. And we were talking and he said, you have got to do DSD. He said it couples so beautifully with global diagnosis. You just have to do it. And I said, yeah, I know, but I didn't do it. And so then a year later, Brian and I were at a meeting together again in Chicago. And he said, so tell me about DSD. How are you doing with it? I hung my head and I said, well, I didn't do anything about it. He said, you have got to go take Coachman's residency program. And I said, okay. And so I signed up. I went to New York and it was at NYU. Still remember it very clearly. And you got up and spoke. You started the morning on a Monday morning. It was a full week. And I went up to you at a break and introduced myself. And you were very gracious and at least played like you knew who I was. And
of course,
so that was sort of the genesis of our friendship. And during the week, you then said, would you like to give a 15-minute presentation about global diagnosis? And I said, sure, it'd be my pleasure. And so that was the first time that you and I were sort of together talking about global diagnosis. And you were very complimentary about, the 15-minute presentation. And that was the beginning of our friendship. And I did then actually go home and start doing digital smile design. And it's hard. After you go to the residency program, it's hard to go home and do the first case. But once you get the first case done, the second case is easier. And the third case is easier. And it has been one of the most important and relevant things that have happened to me in the last decade for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's really fun. It really helps with this whole issue of patient communication. I mean, that is for me the crux of DSD, and that is the patient communication part of it. But it's also, I think, helped me to remain relevant, because as I age and stand in front of groups, people know I'm getting older. And in order to be relevant to a younger group of dentists, you can't be talking about gold restorations. I mean, I still do gold in my practice, but you can't lecture about that because it's not relevant anymore to them. And so DSD has brought a lot of pleasure to me in my clinical practice, but it's also helped me to remain relevant, I think, in the eyes of younger dentists, because as I lecture and incorporate this in my lectures, I still find that there's a small percentage of people that have really embraced this technology. It's amazing. After 10 years of you teaching this, it's still, it's just the grass is so green.
It's still happening, and you cannot imagine. For me, it's just a beautiful thing to listen to all that you're saying. Of course, people can imagine coming from you. Amazing compliment. 100% knew who you were, okay, just to emphasize this. And somebody told me that you were coming before, and I was extremely honored, and even feeling the anxiety and the pressure to be actually teaching with you in the audience. I had this crazy idea of inviting a mentor that I just met to actually teach in my own course live in front of everybody. You were like, yeah, I have my laptop. If you want, I can do it. It was just crazy. And you went up there and you gave an amazing lecture as always. As you said, the friendship started. This also brings us to one thing that we both love, and that is teaching. And I want to understand, how did you fall in love with teaching? Why? What are the main things that you admire on a teacher?
It's interesting. I didn't set out to become a teacher. That was never a goal for me. I didn't see myself in that way. So it was a very slow evolution for me. And as I moved from being a resident to being a director of a residency program, that happened fairly early in my career. So I became director of the GPR at the VA in San Antonio when I'd been out of my program just 2 or 3 years. And so I had to start to develop my teaching skills, because clearly that was going to be an important part of what I did. And I can't honestly tell you that I remember who my mentors were, because it's been so long ago, and helping me learn to teach. I don't really know whether I had a group of people or whether I just observed what I thought, what I liked in a teacher. And as I think about it, people have asked me to help them learn to be teachers, and I don't think I'm much of a teacher of teachers. I don't know that I can take a group of people and teach them how to become a teacher. But as I think back about what I do, what I think I do and do well, is first of all, I spend a lot of time conceiving my lectures. In other words, this is not something that happens sort of on the fly. Like anything else, it takes a lot of work. And when I'm creating a new lecture, I make an outline. And so I am doing this in a very methodical way when I'm creating a lecture. And the latest lecture I've created is in some ways my most fun. And when we sort of went into the COVID lockdown, a lot of good things came out of that for me. I almost feel guilty because it was like a time of rebirth for me, because I had free time that I'd never had before to be creative. And one of the things I started back in those days was a lecture that has now become my favorite one to give. And it's entitled A 50-Year Retrospective, My Failures and Lessons Learned. And it's a failures lecture. And one of my mentors many years ago said, always photograph your failures, especially yours, but any failures you see, because someday you'll be able to use them and learn from them. And it's very difficult to take photographs the day you fail. In other words, something happens, you break a file, or the patient swallows a crown, something terrible in your practice. It's hard to make yourself photograph it, but I've always done it. And so I assume I've got one of the largest caches of failures of any clinical dentist on earth. And when I started this lecture, it started out with only 4 subjects, and now it's up to 21. So I send this menu of lectures to a study club, and I can only go over about 5 of them in a day. And therefore, the study club director can pick out the 5 that they want to go over, and that's what we do.
That's cool.
And so that kind of leads into the other part. So the first part about being a good teacher, I think it's got to be done very, very methodically. It has to be systematically, the lecture has to be created based on an outline. The second really important part is just the opposite. And I think that's telling a story. And I think that's something I do well. And the more you can tell a story when you're teaching, the more you connect with your audience. And so I would say that's the 2 primary areas that I've tried to work on through my career as a teacher. And that is being methodical and systematic in the creation of my presentations, but to attempt to tell a story throughout the presentation from beginning to end.
That's 2 great suggestions and tips for sure. Now, going back to your first point, systematic. One of the things I mentioned at the beginning is the difference between presenting a beautiful case and teaching, right? Most of the people on stages you see are clinicians presenting great cases one after the other. Now, presenting great cases one after the other, just look at this case, I did this, this, and this, look at the outcome, amazing. Next case, boom. This is what most people do, right? This is not, for me, not teaching. This is just showcasing something that looks good, showing what happened in a case. When you are invited to a lecture, you think about a topic, how do you move away from just putting one case after the other and creating a lecture that is not about the case, but it's about the topic? It's about the lesson that you want people to learn. What is the process that you go through to structure that? If you can give some more insights about it.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's
part
the
of the
secret.
answer is once again, to surround yourself with really smart people that are smarter than you are. And we mentioned my teaching partner, Jeff Rouse, before. So when I left academics 25 years ago, I was in full-time academics at the dental school in San Antonio, and Jeff invited me to leave academics and go into private practice with him, and I decided to do it. And so I brought from the academic world a very literature-based systematic, objective way of looking at dentistry. And I also was a good photographer, and I was all about doing good photography and making serial photographs of a technique. And so I was very much of the technician. I was the one that thought in terms of the science and in terms of literature. And I was very much about being literature-based, being evidence-based in what I was teaching. Jeff was different. Jeff was intellectually the most talented, maybe other than, I can think of a couple of other people that are as talented intellectually as Jeff, but I know of nobody that's more talented intellectually. So I just happened to fall into a relationship with one of the smartest dentists on earth. And so I was the guy I had the good emotional intelligence. Jeff was very shy, and he wasn't great in front of a group, but intellectually he was so far above me. And so our marriage early on was a marriage made in heaven, because I brought a skill set that he didn't have, and he brought a skill set that I didn't have. And when we practiced together for a few years, it was essentially the richest time in my life intellectually, because he was so smart and he challenged me in my thinking process so much. And at that point in time, we were both becoming devotees of John Coy's, and we were taking Coy's courses, and we were learning about facially generated diagnosis. And we both believed that it was brilliant, and we started incorporating that into our practice. But we also felt that there needed to be an equal emphasis on the gingival levels. And that was the genesis of the global diagnosis system. Coy's emphasized incisal ledge position, we emphasized gingival levels, and it was sort of a beautiful marriage between those two things. So I think I'm sort of tiptoeing around your question, because Jeff Rouse had a giant impact on the way I thought, and sort of this linear approach to treatment planning, instead of this and this and sort of a shoot from the hip. We developed this very linear approach to treatment planning. And the thing that I saw early on as I was teaching treatment planning to young dentists is the mistake that we make in dentistry, and we still make it today for sure. In medicine, our physician colleagues gather data, number one. Number two, they make a diagnosis. And number three, they make a treatment plan. In dentistry, we gather data and we go straight to the treatment plan. We leave out the diagnosis. And in my mind, that is one of the biggest problems in dental education today. And that is, we don't make a diagnosis before we make a treatment plan. And that's what Jeff and I, that was the systematic approach that Jeff and I created. That is, you must make a diagnosis, because if you have a diagnosis, then there's only a limited number of ways you can treat each given diagnosis. And then it makes it much more objective. So I think treatment planning needs to become more objective and less subjective by making a diagnosis before we make a treatment plan.
It's actually poor documentation. Not only documentation, is poor documentation, is partial documentation, is no diagnosis, poor decisions, and then you have the plan.
Yes, well said.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's the reason why, when we develop the whole 3D software workflow that we use, it's basically inspired from what we learned from you. DSD didn't reinvent, anything. We didn't invent any concept in terms of treatment planning. We just learned what people like you and Coy's and Spear and Kokich and Shish and so many others, the thinking process was out there already. Now you bring 3D technology and you say like, okay, the thinking process is there. Very few are using that thinking process, unfortunately. How can technology actually help translate this thinking process visually, right? And it's beautiful to see how we can explain facially generated treatment planning and diagnosis with 3D software. How can we explain global diagnosis with 3D software, right? You just look at the images that the software is providing you, and you open your book and you go through the 4, 5, 6 rule there, and you just go step by step, looking into the 3D software, and you have the perfect world.
So I've got a question for you, Christian. You've been in this world more than anybody else for the last decade and a half. So my first question is, why is it still so slow to be adopted across the board? And secondly, how long do you think it's going to take before it becomes essentially a treatment standard rather than a gee whiz treatment option?
So Coys and Spear, they came up with this, and Rick Robley, I would definitely add him there.
Yeah,
so Rick
sure.
Robley at first, Coy, Spear, all these guys,
Yes.
they came up with this idea in the early 90s. And still people are not using it. You have a brilliant book that is almost 10 years out, and still people don't know about it. I used to get frustrated with that. I don't get frustrated anymore. I just think that it's the natural path, right? It's the natural pace of things. It's the natural implementation process that, people just need time to go little by little into things. The other thing that I see is that neither one of us, all of us, and I'm being very, very bold here to try to put me into this group of bringing these new ideas, starting from Robley, Coys, and Spear, and all of you guys, all the way to people like me trying to bring this into 3D and teach people how to bring this to their daily reality. That's what we struggle, right? We tell people, you have to use it every day. There's no way out. Every single patient needs to be seen on the same path, with the same diagnosis, with the same approach, the same documentation, the same brainstorm, the same interdisciplinary analysis, right? Everything makes so much sense. Everything is so obvious, actually, right? It's so obvious. We see your lecture on it's a 10-minute lecture, the 4, 5, 6 global diagnosis. It's so obvious. You're like, damn, this is ridiculous. I need to do this. And then people leave and they don't, right? And they don't. And one thing that I am realizing is that to do the dentistry that we dream with, to do the dentistry that we love, to do the dentistry that we get inspired with from our mentors, first and foremost, we need to inspire our patients to pay for it. We need to convince our patients about it. We need to onboard them on these crazy ideas. Global diagnosis, if we want people to use it on every first, second diagnosis appointment, we need to show people how to sell this idea, how to make patients fall in love with global diagnosis. You need to make your patient fan of global diagnosis. You need to make your patient fan of facially generated treatment planning, because they need to pay for it. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. People say that they do things, they don't think about money. This is BS, that they are doing all for the patient. BS, it's all blah, blah. At the end of the day, people will implement, technologies, concepts, philosophies when they see that the return on the investment is happening. And so we need to master the process of helping people become storytellers, as you said, about these concepts. How can you tell this story on a non-dental way so people will embrace it? When people start knocking the doors of your students, knock, knock, knock. I came here because I want global diagnosis. People will be like, God damn it, where's that book? I need to do this right now, and I need to do it over and over again, And then another patient says, oh, I only came because of global diagnosis. Do you do that? Do you do global diagnosis? And we need to learn with Invisalign. Regardless if you like it or not, they did it. They made patients love it, and they told the story, and they started to make patients knock at our door, say, I want to do Invisalign. Do you do Invisalign? No, but I do something better. Goodbye. Ciao, ciao. I'm going to look for somebody else. And then suddenly everybody's like, oh my God, I need to do Invisalign. And now people are doing Invisalign even when you don't need to do Invisalign. So we need a company like Invisalign embracing Rick Robley's book. Imagine if Invisalign, would study global diagnosis and say, this is our next mission. We're going to make the world love global diagnosis. We're going to push this world, and we're going to make patients understand the value of it, and we're going to make patients ask for it. Then the magic happens. That's my opinion.
Where do you think we are? Where do you think we are? And I'm interested to know your idea also, Kirk. Where do you think we are on the innovation curve related to digital smile design and using that concept as a communication tool? I mean, innovation, curve comes down and back up. Yep. Where are we on that curve?
It's hard to say. I speculate all the time, but it's almost the bell curve of learning. And Bill, I've heard you describe it. You've got these people that will adopt it, they do it, and it improves their lives. And then you've got the others that listen and digest it, and it takes a while before they get it, and then they move in that direction. But it's really hard to say. I do know that the people that start with the beginner's mindset and they enter these courses with humility and they use it, they always come back and say they're making progress. But that's a hard one for me to answer. Christian, your thoughts?
What is the percentage of doctors in US, Bill, that you think are using facially generated, dental facial? They are using the book from Robley, the articles from Coys and Spear, and your book, Global Diagnosis. What is the percentage of doctors that you think are using it routinely as a principle to diagnose and plan their cases? 10% of the doctors, maybe?
No, I don't think it's that high. I think it is only people that have taken Coys' courses or been to the Spear Center, or the handful that have heard me speak through the year. I do not think it's anywhere near 10% of American dentists are using facially generated diagnosis. I think the number would be significantly less.
So think about that. Now, to use DSD, first you need to understand these principles. There's no way out. There's no way a doctor will take full advantage of DSD if this doctor doesn't understand what you, Coy, Spear, Robley are saying. First, you need to understand it. And first, you need to already be in the middle of the journey of using it routinely. And then you put technology on top that brings another level of challenge of implementation. So I don't know if the percentage is much smaller than 10. I think in US specifically, there's a decent number of doctors that are following that philosophy, people that are part of Seattle Study Club, Dawson Academy, Coy, Spear. Even if let's guess 8% of doctors in US are following, these principles routinely. I would cut this in half when you add digital. Half of them are mastering these principles plus digital. So you're talking about 2, 3, 4% of doctors that are actually doing what we call, not to put a brand DSD on it. So we are moving away from brand to what we call comprehensive digital care. That's my new name, comprehensive digital care. So it's not about DSD company, DSD brand. It's the concept of using everything we learned from interdisciplinary treatment planning, diagnosis and treatment planning. That's the comprehensive approach. Using smart technology, that's the digital, and understanding the relationship with the patient, that's the care. So comprehensive digital care brings the 3 pillars. I would say 2, 3% of doctors in US are already enjoying this routinely. So there's a big market for us to explore in terms of education.
Well, and we all are bemoaning the way dentistry is moving in the world, and certainly the United States, and that is to the corporate model. And people commonly ask me, do you think there's going to be, is it going to ultimately be all corporate? Is dentistry eventually going to become all corporate? No, I don't think so. I do believe there's always going to be a place at the top. Now, I don't know if that's because that's where I am, and I believe there'll be a place for me, but I do think that there's always going to be a place for this. And in fact, it's the perfect way not to have to do the other.
That's what we call it. It's like being the 3-star Michelin restaurant. All these principles that we are talking are the shortcut for a doctor to be the 3-star Michelin restaurant. and not be inside corporate dentistry if that's not what you want, right? I don't think that in the future corporate dentistry will be bad. The same way that medical hospitals are not necessarily bad. Physicians are not running their hospital, they are working for hospitals, and we're going to be very similar. Dentistry will evolve to that.
Right.
But you will always have space for the very good private practice, delivering high quality, unique experiences. But you need to learn these principles. You need to differentiate yourself. But the corporate world, you mentioned corporate world, will learn these principles as well. And that's another path.
Exactly.
That is going to happen very fast, because the moment that the corporate world understands that this will generate predictability, that this will improve quality in a more consistent way, that this will differentiate themselves. I see corporations already looking at these principles and thinking there's very smart business there, and you're going to see chains of clinics starting to incorporate this technology, starting to incorporate these principles, of course, with the business mindset, but bringing this more mainstream.
Well, for sure. And with the economies of scale, they're in the perfect position to do this.
Yep.
They can afford the technology better than the mom and pop operation can afford it.
Yep.
So there's no question. It'll just be interesting to see if and when which of the companies do adopt it, because it will take a real commitment for a corporate organization.
It's gonna happen
into interdisciplinary treatment planning.
It's gonna happen, and of course, corporate is like, I always use Ferrari and Fiat, right? You're never gonna have on Fiat everything that you have on Ferrari. They're the same company, they're the same, but Fiat benefits. They handpick the amazing things that were developed on Formula One Ferrari, and they dumb down a little bit, and they choose the things that can be used on mainstream that makes the Fiat a better car. Definitely makes it a better car. So corporate dentistry will start to learn all these things and start to bring things that can be scaled, right? But that will help dentistry get better for the masses, for sure. And I see that happening, when Invisalign launches Smile Architect. It's a clear move on trying to bring facially generated digital smile design, global diagnosis. I'm helping, for example, Align bring global diagnosis into their Smile Architect that is serving millions of dentists. And suddenly you're going to have that incorporated in a way where these ideas will help, thousands of patients.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very well said, gentlemen. So as we look back at, or look at two careers of two amazing teachers and leaders in dentistry, what's your final thoughts or hopes for not only the profession or anybody listening to this podcast?
Bill, you.
My final thought is that this is the most exciting time to be a dentist ever on earth. There is no question about it. And when I look at my son and what lies ahead for him, there's certainly a part of me that wants to remain young and viable for as long as I can, to sort of share a little bit of this journey that he's going through at the beginning and I'm going through at the end. But I've never, and I'm being honest, Kirk, when I say this, I've never been more enthused about dentistry than I am today. I've got a patient in about 15 minutes. I'm going to get to do an aesthetic crown lengthening on this patient, and life is awesome as a dentist for me. It's never been better. And so I don't know who is listening today. I don't know if it's young dentists or old dentists or no dentist at all. But for the young dentist, you are well placed in the best profession on earth. There is clearly no other medical profession that compares with what we get to do. This is the best time ever to be a dentist.
I totally agree. And I would emphasize, with all the crazy artificial intelligence disruption, and literally probably in the next few years, professions will disappear almost, or will be completely changed in the next 5 to 10 years. What is going to happen in the professional world is just crazy insane, right? But dentistry is getting even more stronger with all this advancement and more vital, because you cannot substitute that easy what we do. Less and less. And technology will always support us, but will never, at least for 100 years, will not be able to do what we do. So just to emphasize, Bill, I think that young dentists that are still struggling, did I choose the right profession? Oh my God, this is tough. Oh my God, right or wrong. You made a great decision. If it was a pure strategic decision, you made an amazing decision for your life. Just hang in, don't give up, and the future is bright.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
Amen to both of what you both said. And I don't care if you're a dentist or a non-dentist. I think the challenge for anybody listening is always keep your best years in front of you. And I see that with both of you. So it keeps the journey exciting. So thank you, gentlemen, for both being on today. As always, I appreciate your friendship, your leadership, and just who you guys are.
Amazing.
It's been an honor for me to be with two of my favorite people. I wish we were in person so we could hug, but
yes.
Other than that, it's been a great day for me. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of it, both of you.
Hope to see you guys soon in person. All the best.
All the best.